Are expected on Sunday, but early results are projecting a landslide win for him. Mohammed Adda was in Kampala.
President Museveni has taken an early lead in votes already counted and tallied. Election officials say the margin between him and his most formidable challenger, Kizza Besigye, is so wide that President Museveni is on his way to giving himself a new 5-year term in office. That will make his rule of Uganda 30 good years. The opposition have already started complaining. They say the vote is rigged.
And I'm sure you have been shown, many of you, a sample of the predict ballots which were being carried around by some of Museveni's supporters. Predict in favor of Mr. Museveni. These were found out just outside the polling stations.
Security has been tightened in and around the capital city, Kampala, where majority of the opposition supporters are. There are fears that the opposition would bring people out to protest against the victory of President Yoweri Museveni. And the government is saying it's not taking any chances and will not allow any such demonstrations to take place.
Venezuela has dismissed Washington calls for an international investigation into alleged human rights abuses by the government of Hugo Chavez. The investigation is a key demand of a group of Venezuelan students who've been on a hunger strike for more than 2 weeks. They say the government uses judges and prosecutors to target President Chavez's political rivals.
Carta Democrática Interamericana fue firmada por el presidente de la República, Hugo Chávez. Venezuela está suscrita a la Organización de Estados Americanos. No puede ser que cuando un país miembro manifieste su preocupación por lo que está pasando en materia de derechos humanos en un país.
Well, clashes broke out in the German city of Dresden after thousands of people gathered to protest against the neo-Nazi march. It was the second such rally in 2 weeks and marked the 1945 bombing of Dresden by Allied forces. Here's Rory Challens.
Dresden on Saturday afternoon, and police are battling on 2 fronts. Thousands of anti-fascist demonstrators managed to break into an area of the city reserved for a neo-Nazi rally. A court had ruled the day before the fascists could stage the march, but these protesters had other ideas. It turns into a running battle near Dresden's main railway station. Demonstrators hurl paving stones and fireworks. Police respond with water cannon and pepper spray. It's the second time in a week Dresden has seen trouble like this. Many in the city say the court shouldn't have allowed the march in the first place. Stopped in their tracks and unable to reach the station, around 600 neo-Nazis then decide to leave the city for Leipzig. Police there expect as many as 4,000 to turn up for Sunday. Rory Challens, AlJazeera.
2 German journalists have been released from prison in Iran after being charged with spying. Marcus Hellwig and Jens Koch were sentenced to 20 months in prison for interviewing the son and the lawyer of women condemned to death by stoning. But Iran's Revolution Court dismissed the sentences, instead slapping each with a $50,000 fine. The world's biggest economies have reached a deal on how to track imbalances in the global economy. China was initially reluctant, but came on board in the end. From the G20 finance ministers meeting in Paris, here's Jackie Rowland.
Putting on a show of unity. The smiles of the family photo can't paper over the divisions within the G20. The world's leading financial powers agree that there are imbalances in the global economy, but it's much harder to agree on how to measure them. The sticking point was China. It didn't want its massive foreign currency reserves to be used as an indicator, but G20 members were able to reach a compromise.
This is a very complicated undertaking, and we need to be very careful to make sure we create a level playing field across countries so that financial activity does not migrate to jurisdictions where standards are weaker or less vigorously enforced.
Ministers have also been focusing on commodity prices and food prices in particular. They want to find ways to protect the poorest countries against big price swings.
We have had a major convergence of views between different countries, developing countries and emerging countries, industrialized countries, to say that we had to go much farther in transparency, in the identification of stocks, in the use of agricultural land to respond to the need of population for food.
The financial crisis of 2008 was a global phenomenon, and ministers recognise that they'll need to take a global approach if another meltdown is to be avoided. The French hosts of this meeting have warned countries that they'll need to put self-interest to one side if the whole of the G20 is to achieve strong, sustainable growth. The long haggling over indicators raises a bigger question. If the members of the G20 found it so hard to agree on how to measure global imbalances, will they ever reach agreement on how to tackle those problems? Jackie Rowland, Al Jazeera, Paris.
"30 minutes past the hour. This is Al Jazeera, and these are the stories making headlines. Anti-government protests in Libya are widening. Witnesses are talking about a massacre by security forces in the city of Benghazi. A doctor there has told Al Jazeera she's seen over 50 dead in the hospital she works in, amongst them an 8-year-old boy who died from a gunshot wound to the head. And in the city of Baida, east of Benghazi, foreign mercenaries have been seen on the streets. Witnesses have told us they're shooting live ammunition at demonstrators.
It is a massacre in the full sense of the word. All kinds of weapons are being used against the civilian population. They are firing at people indiscriminately, using civilian cars without license plates to roam the streets and shoot at the people. There are dozens, maybe even hundreds of people who have been killed today. Yesterday, I was at the Jala hospital to look at the dead bodies and found that most of those killed were shot to the head and chest and in the eyes. It feels like an open war zone between protesters and the security forces. And there are mercenaries wearing yellow construction helmets who are attacking people from inside their homes.
Opposition groups in Bahrain are expected to set out their demands to the Crown Prince. Thousands of anti-government protesters have gathered once again at Pearl Roundabout. It's become the center of anti-regime protests and was the scene last week of 2 separate attacks by security forces. Riot police have clashed with anti-government protesters in Algeria's capital. Officers broke up a rally after thousands gathered in the center of the city. Police disrupted a similar rally last week, which was organized to call for better living conditions and greater freedoms. Government supporters have also been taken to the streets, adding to the rising tension. And police in Kuwait have fired tear gas at protesters described as stateless long-term residents. They're demanding citizenship, free education, healthcare, as well as jobs. Those are benefits that are available to all Kuwaiti nationals. Protesters sang the Kuwaiti anthem and chanted slogans such as "We are Kuwaitis." And supporters and opponents of legislation to reduce the power of unions have held rival protests in the U.S. state of Wisconsin.